Hi, my name is BJackson, and I'm putting together this video in pursuit of my attempting to become a lead faculty. So what I'm going to do today actually is give a excerpt, or actually I might try to do the whole presentation. This is normally an hour-long presentation on materials disclosure and transparency, which is a very hot topic right now in the lead geek circles, which I'm definitely a huge proponent of such. And like I said, this is a presentation I normally go around to different firms and give to manufacturers to get them thinking about EPDs and HPDs. I apologize for my personal appearance right now because it's almost Halloween and I'm attempting to be a Civil War general, so take that for what you will, and hopefully you think that I'm part of the way there. Anyhow, I'm going to turn it around now. And like I said, this is normally an hour-long presentation with a long Q&A afterwards, so I'm going to try to get this in maybe under 10 minutes, and we'll see how it goes. But I'm going to turn it around now and just sort of speak to the presentation. And hopefully you'll get a good sense about my speaking abilities and how I would handle what would normally be a very full room. But tonight, since it's late after hours at my office, it is just a room of one. So without further ado, this is my presentation entitled Taking a Stance on Materials Transparency. So when we give this presentation, normally I talk about materials in a sort of a timeline of lead and the thinking about healthy materials. We'll review changes between version 3 and version 4. We'll talk about the alphabet soup associated with those changes and new tools to help designers make this leap into chemistry a little bit easier. And generally some policies that designers and non-designers can use to sort of begin thinking about how to implement healthy materials moving forward. If you look at the slide here, just talking from 1996 is really the beginning of sort of the mainstream notion about looking at healthy materials. And so it starts with green spec, goes all the way through founding of Pharos, Cradle to Cradle, founding of the Living Building Challenge, Cradle to Cradle Institute, Perkins and Will's precautionary list, all the way till today with HPDs, LEED version 4, Declare, Living Building Challenge, etc. One thing I like to point out is that it took about 20 years in essence for LEED and even the sustainability circuit to go around from, instead of thinking about materials for just what that they are inherently and their inherent values and attributes, to more of a broad stroke thought about what it means to be a healthy material and what those materials that we've been disclosing this whole time, or those attributes about materials, what their impacts are on humans. And I think it's interesting that it took us that long to get to where we are now. And hopefully this gives a framework of the complexity here, and also that we're just now getting started. So there's a lot of work to do in regard to figuring out these outcomes. This is just a slide put together by the Healthy Building Network, which shows the level of complexity with trying to define healthy products and the different drivers and the different definitions of what a healthy product is, and this notion of red lists, or lists that contain materials which are banned from certain building rating systems such as LEED or the Green Guide for Healthcare or the precautionary list. Certainly LEED has been a driver behind a lot of this. Once upon a time it was very difficult just to get recycled content. Now you can't get any sort of manufacturer information without getting pounded with a LEED sheet. So this is really great, and we're hoping that in the future it'll be the same with the ingredients in building products and their health outcomes. So I'll skip through some of these slides that talk in a little bit of detail just in the sake of time today. And what I want to talk about is that notion of creating the supply and demand for healthier building products. So again, there was once upon a time when it was difficult to get the recycled content or the regional aspects of a material and some of those more common LEED concepts that we sort of take for granted today. And so the idea that by starting today with creating a demand for open, transparent, and disclosed materials, and also simultaneously looking at their human health impacts, hopefully by generating that demand, over time will increase the quantity, will increase the supply, and will lower the cost of such materials, such that, just like today with recycled content and regional materials being an expectation of a project or a product, we can actually expect the same in regard to health outcomes. And so my talk today really talks about the building product and disclosure and optimization credits within LEED version 4. We could talk in any great amount of detail about the overall section or any of the credits, but I really want to talk about these three credits. The text here, just in the sake of time, is literally just to say that what we used to look at in regard to LEED materials is just the attributes that make them what they are, whether it's regional, renewable materials, FSC wood, VOC contents, etc. LEED version 4 has asked us to continue asking for and looking for those things, but also to include PBTs. They have different ways of looking at salvageable and materials and whole building LCA, so they break that out even further. And there's different definitions for regionality and different third-party certification methods. PBTs, persistent bioaccumulative toxins. These are relatively new to LEED, but this has come out of the Green Guide for Healthcare. And in lieu of, or in sort of the trend with LEED trying to match the language across all the various suites of LEED, this was one that came out of healthcare and is now sort of becoming part of all of LEED version 4. And PBTs are important because they are industrial byproducts that work their way back up the food chain and end up in humans. And so the persistent and the bioaccumulative are really very apt titles in this toxin, because once they get into humans, they just continue to accumulate, and they cause problems. Aside from the obvious environmental problems as well. And so I use this picture here to talk about how PBTs are often passed from mother to child, and this most intimate of encounters, as innocent as it is interestingly a way of taking PBT from the environment and placing it in our newborn children. And so what do you do with this? And so LEED is trying to take this is my take, I suppose, on trying to put together a couple of concepts. One item is to just, to take lemons and make lemonade. But here it's really about what do you do with all the alphabet soup. And so on the item on the left here just shows how you can make that something that's a little bit more fun than some of the heavy lifting on the chemistry end, which we could go into in a little bit. So the alphabet soup is really rearranging all these different parts to make sense out of what are product category rules. What is life cycle cost analysis, or LCA? What is environmental product declarations, health product declarations, and all the different aspects that LEED version 4 is asking us to look at. And I'll skip through some of this just in the interest of time. So LCA really begins to look at, and this is a concept that we in the design field are very similar or familiar with, but it really begins to look at the cradle to gate aspects of a product, from extraction all the way through packaging, and then it becoming what it was intended to become. And it really just looks at that part of the supply chain. And this is just an example of what some of these pieces look like. So the LCA and the product category rules end up becoming EPDs. And so the environmental product declarations, or EPDs, are basically a measure of all of those cradle to gate aspects on the product and their environmental attributes, pluses or minuses in whichever direction. And so this is rain zinc, a very common product that we use in a lot of building projects, and this is a cut down version of what is a 12-page EPD. But this isn't anything that's drastically different from the MCDC sheets that we look at, or the MSDS sheets, depending on which industry that you're in. But this is something that LEED is rewarding us for with new points. And HPDs looks at the health product declaration, or the health impacts of the chemistry in different building ingredients projects. So what we're looking at really is we're requesting information that discloses the environmental and the human health impacts. And so HPD, this is version 1, version 2.0 is going to be out pretty soon. And these are relatively new things that we as designers can begin to demand from our manufacturing partners in order to distinguish those who are truly committed to fleshing some of these things out so that we can make better products. So there's, why are we promoting these things? At the end of the day, and this number is probably quite old, and I call this avoiding 496. Really, we're trying to avoid we're trying to distinguish in a marketplace that's oversaturated with a whole bunch of green nests, and we don't really know which one is better or for worse. And so some of these eco labels, as they're called, should be quite recognizable to people, such as I imagine Fair Trade or FSC is pretty common to folks, Cradle to Cradle. But some of the other ones, it takes a lot of vetting to figure out which one of these makes sense. And so like what we're trying to do is avoid that. We're trying to give people the power to make individual informed decisions based on their project goals and not having to dive into each one of these pieces, because I'm sure that there's probably over 500 by now. In this presentation, I tend to talk a little bit about each one, so cradle-to-cradle certification, green screen, and some of the tools that get us to it. So in the sake of time, I'm just going to briefly touch on these. So Pharos is one tool that designers can use to begin to look at those cradle-to-gate aspects. And this is a really great online tool where you can narrow down topics pretty quickly. So this is a real-world question that I encountered once on a project, was how do you, and this demonstrates how you would use Pharos. So one of the questions that we had is, which plywood should I use to earn the maximum number of lead points? So we knew that our location was Boston, and we knew that we needed to look for recycled content, regional content, the manufacturer extraction distance, and FSC if we could find it. So based on these criteria, we were able to search in Pharos. What we found was there were 30 different products that were in Pharos, and once we applied these 3 knowns that we were looking for, it narrowed it down to 3 based on the location. So what it does is it actually helps you narrow your search rather quickly to projects that can help do things like maximize your lead points. And so what we were able to do is to look through and very quickly vet which product was the best. And then we were able to get 3 costs on that and write a competitive spec and make sure that each one of the options met our lead goals. And so Pharos is very good at that. And this is just a screenshot of what Pharos looks like, and you can actually customize these, and it gives you a lot of information about some of the toxicology and the environmental attributes of all these pieces that we as architects haven't been trained in. Declare is another useful tool. Generally speaking, anything that has a declare label will work for a lead project. Again, generally speaking, not 100% of the time, so it's always good to vet it. But I would propose designers to use this tool as a starting point to look for some of the best environmental performers. And they give a online search tool where you can search by CSI division, and it's very helpful. And I would say that people that have gone to this, or manufacturers, excuse me, that have gone to this level of rigor to be included in Declare, I think that we should give them the power of our purchase. And there are other tools on the market that are being used right now. Green Wizard is one of the more well-known ones, and certainly it's the largest online repository of HPDs in the industry, and so a lot of firms are using that simply for the HPD aspect of it, although there are other aspects of the tool that can be used to help your lead projects. So decision-making complexity. So this must feel like, you're just juggling chainsaws, because it takes what's already a very convoluted and very difficult and even personally driven process, i.e. selecting materials, and making it even more complex by asking us to look at things that we're not familiar with as designers. And it definitely feels like managing a lot of data. And you can get lost in the data, or you can use it to your advantage. What some firms are doing, and at the time there were 27. I know now there's over 30 firms that have signed policies in regard to favoring products and manufacturers which disclose EPDs and HPDs. Our firm is one of those, Troy Cobus and Associates, and I'm proud to say that the 5 highlighted here are the ones that are in the Boston area that have signed on, and I know that Bergmeyer and Associates has signed on as well. So there's at least 6 of us in the Boston region that have signed on and have a standing policy which we communicate to our vendors publicly and in-house. This is all of their letters. And all the letters say generally about the same thing. The point is that we took this as a inspiration, and then we customized it to our own particular needs. And so our needs are highlighted in our personal letter, which is signed by our CEO, myself, our Sustainability Resources Manager, and our interior designer. So we have a lot of internal buy-in on this policy to promote and give preference to EPD and HPD materials. And we publish it on our website. So just like Ozzy back in the 80s, he was really scary back then, but now when we look back, he's really kind of cuddly, and he had his own reality TV show, and he's not really as scary as we thought he was. And so I hope that HPDs, EPDs, and materials optimization and transparency and disclosure eventually becomes the same thing. So what can we do? This is the main point when we give this presentation, is I typically overwhelm people with all the PCRs and EPDs and alphabet soup and concepts, but at the end of the day it's really quite easy. I challenge firms, and also challenge owners as well, to update their baseline specifications to include the language for this, or put out RFPs that require designers to do this. Work closely with the owner in contract to establish the roles and responsibilities. Educate the team members and create a firm-wide policy. Give preference to these products. Store them in your internal database. Sign on to the tools that help us build these things, and differentiate your firm by quote-unquote being with it. We have a Healthy Materials Summit going on this fall in Boston, and there are several other cities around the country that have had these. Ours is going to be unique because we're going to be targeting over 150 institutional and business leaders to generate the demand at the source, as opposed to being a sort of grassroots-driven initiative from the architects and design community. And this is where we open it up to Q&A. So, looks like we got it in at about 17 minutes, which isn't too bad. Because I like to talk, as you can probably tell. But I hope this gives a good idea about my presentation skills, my speaking abilities, and the kinds of presentations that I put together visually. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope that it builds a strong case for me to be a lead faculty. Thank you very much.